Hi, this is Gigi Haycock, one of the programmers for the SF Doc Fest in 2023. And I have the pleasure of having two people here related to the film Motel Drive. And we have Brendan Garrity, who is the writer, director, and producer, along with Christopher Stout, who is the producer and editor. And I want to thank you all for coming and agreeing to do a little Q&A with us. Tell us about the film.
Course. Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here. Thanks, Gigi. So yeah, Motel Drive. It's a strip of 8th Mile strip of about 15 motel properties. It's in Central California called the Central Valley, just, kind of a breadbasket of the US. And has an interesting history, kind of had its heyday in the 60s with a lot of entertainers that came through Vegas entertainment pipeline. Nat King Cole and Frank Sinatra played in some of these motels. And a lot of the story revolves around infrastructure. So a freeway bypassed it, around the end of the 60s. And then it, kind of began a period of rapid decline to where now there's about 100, depending on the count, 130, 150 families that live in these motel properties. It's very cramped space. And so you have a mix of stakeholders from mostly single mother families. It's about 90% there, who are just, working poor families, essentially, very transient. There's also a lot of sex work that happens in these motels. That this is kind of the area of the city where it's just kind of, look the other way and relegated to. And there's also a lot of ex-convicts, a lot of them sex offenders placed there by the state as they're released from prison. So it's a really obviously difficult, challenging environment for these families and for these kids to grow up in. And so it's watching a young boy's experience from adolescence up through sort of early adulthood and just walking alongside of them. And they're relocated by the California High-Speed Rail project that sort of upends their lives once again. And you just watch the family and this young boy come out the other side.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the connections that you made. How did you meet the Shaw family?
It was, so I started this in 2014, and I read a Vice News article in 2014 that just had some, it wasn't about Motel Drive in particular, it was about a California Highway Patrol program, but they had this inset photography that sort of featured these, large Americana old motel signs, like if you think of the Denny sign or something like that. And so it was a pure intuition. I was just curious about the place. And so I just drove up and, literally kind of drove by, stopped off, took a few pictures, and quickly learned, as somewhat of an outsider, that in phases over a year of, all the things I mentioned were going on all in this place. And so the Shaws, which was typical, everybody was very suspicious of my presence there. I think they thought I was an undercover cop. So it took really my trips in between working in production down in LA, just a few run-ins with them. And at first, didn't want to talk to me, didn't trust me for obvious reasons. And just spending time up there, and getting to know them. And then also Richard, who heads Living in Fresno, the nonprofit. I got to know him sort of around that time, who worked with the family. And that was sort of another layer of credibility. And I think over that duration, they just saw the consistency in me showing up, and that slowly built the trust. So it was just, bumping into them, as I did many people on Golden State, the strip of highway that's Motel Drive. So yeah, it was just running into them at random and slowly kind of getting to know them and get their trust over time.
Yeah. Richard, and it's LAF, right? It's a live.
Live Again
live,
Fresno.
Live Again Fresno, that's
Yep.
right. They're amazing people. And they took also, Justin was there before, even they were there, you know, like he was there from the very beginning before people even knew that there were kids in these motel rooms, right, along the strip, this Motel Drive, and just unaccounted for people. And just to see what, I mean, he'd had a, you know, it seemed like most of the people involved with that have also had a similar, you know, experience with hardship growing up. And you know, he had said that he thought he'd be in jail and things like that, and just to be able to reach out to and see Justin grow, I think that story is a gorgeous one to tell, actually. To see, it feels very hopeful to me when I at the end of the film, which is good. I mean, especially with his parents seem to be, even though I think it was it Jason, his father, who lost his
Yeah.
limbs and everything. Yeah. So I guess you've seen it through the whole, I mean, it was 2015 when you started, was it? Because your first 2015, and just
Started
seeing it.
shooting, yeah.
Yeah. And then, because I saw that in the very beginning, then 2020, you kind of see where they are. How about now? Or can you tell us a little bit about how they are, and how maybe the motels, I mean, because the high speed train, that rail is kind of defunct at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been in this state of purgatory limbo, you know, so it's not officially canceled, but it's you know, there's just no it's a thing where every 5 years they bump the timeline back, and it's like, you know, at first it was, I can't even remember at this point. I think it was originally supposed to be completed in 2018 or 2020. Now I think it stands at 20 in the 2030s. So it's I mean, they technically have some track laid down right around where the Motel Drive strip is. Basically, I think it's like a mile and a half, 2 miles. So they built that very limited infrastructure with all the red tape. It takes years, but they're basically in a holding pattern. And it's, you know, nobody really knows. I mean, you know, if and when it'll be completed. And so, yeah, the Shaw family, you know, I mean, we're in touch. I just drove out. I was on the phone with them we're going out to another film festival. And so they're, you know, it's real life. They're in a tricky situation, you know, with the father, who's now Jason, a quadruple amputee. Their income is tied to his caretaking. She's the officially appointed caretaker for him, so they receive a, you know, a monthly income through that, through the state, and that is mostly what, you know, covers their expenses these days. I didn't address it in the film. It happened, I mean, right as we were kind of wrapping up in post-production, but she was, Deandra, the mother, was unfortunately diagnosed with stage 4 cancer.
Oh,
So, you know, her health is in a kind of precarious state, you know, and this has been going on, I think, for over 6 months now. And so, you know, I mean, with that type of diagnosis, they just don't really know. I mean, she's going through chemotherapy treatment. But you know, with that uncertainty of, you know, the outlook of her health and well-being, they're kind of organizing to have Justin take over that role for the father,
mm-hmm.
which is involved. And so Justin is, you know, he's doing great for where he is, but, you know, as the film kind of shows, I mean, there's so much perpetual disruption of changing schools and going to different
Yeah.
school districts, and, you know, getting taken out by child protective services. And so you know, considering what he's had to go through, he's hanging in there. But I mean, academically, it's, you know, going into college. He tried his first semester of community college, struggled with that. He's now looking at a trade school to go as an electrician. So he's about a year out of school now. So he, you know, I think he's just trying to find his footing there amidst, you know, the situation that his parents are in, which is, you know, challenging to say the least.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So, Christopher, how did you get involved in the project and the editing of it?
Brendan and I are in a documentary filmmaker group called Video Consortium, and Brendan reached out to the group kind of looking for someone to get involved in an editing capacity. And yeah, we met and clicked right away. And we were just sort of mutual admirers of each other's work. And Brendan had done so much of the editing up until that point, but it was clear that the story just needed a slightly different focus, and it needed to be told through a lens. And because there were, these topics we're covering are so large, like the infrastructure and decay of the American society, essentially. And so when we met, we put our heads together to figure out, like, how are we going to tell the story? And then that ultimately came back to through Justin and through this boy growing up and seeing that experience of, truly becoming a man and shouldering all this responsibility and going on to graduate as the president of his high school. Yes, but that was just sort of the goal, was to put our heads together and think, like, how can we create something that everyone can relate to, even if you're not interested in politics or the factors that affect this particular part of California, like, what's the larger story here? And it was just digging through just literal years of footage to hone in on something that felt relatable to everyone.
Yeah, I love how it begins with the heyday, right? With just showing, like, the Rolling Stones stayed there. It was the place in between, and and once, like, I think it was I-5 or whatever freeway went in, it kind of went around, and that they were hoping that this high speed would bring it back into the fold, and obviously it not being kind of paused and everything. Can I ask you about the choice of the French song that was in the introduction? I really loved that. I thought it just matched exactly the images and the archival footage that y'all did.
Yeah, that was one of the most challenging pieces, because as Chris mentioned, I mean, I was very much, this is my first film. I work in TV, kind of a different space, and so this was a bit of a transition, just a straight documentary. And so through Video Consortium, I didn't have, any post services. This was very micro budget DIY type of affair. So with the music, I was just, I want to say it was a year of just exploring around Spotify playlists. So Petula Clark, the song, it's, it's very of the era of kind of, just really wanted to invoke that sense of post World War II classic Americana nostalgia. It had that tone and feeling. So that was the main reason. And I don't speak French, but translating the lyrics, a lot of it is sort of, a lot of it is about isolation and sort of being, it's alone at night in a room, and just, it's more in the sense of, like, longing for a lover or something like that. But there's elements of the lyrics that is just kind of, a nod to solitude and dislocation and disconnection, which certainly speaks to especially the children's experience of just, being isolated from their peers. And so much of their life is, literally in what would be just kind of a bedroom. And because of everything that's going on in that environment, you can't, it's so hard to have a hangout with a friend from school. And so, as Justin kind of says in the film, I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. I just kind of played video games and, was alone with my thoughts and became my own friend. And so the song really, I think, speaks to that in terms of just isolation, kind of that feeling of loneliness. Yeah.
Yeah. I just thought it fit so well into that, and especially, the overall, now that I understand why you chose it, and also just the way that the images were in the very beginning, actually all of the music throughout. So you said it took a while, but it's really, I think, amazing. Really,
the score was done by an amazing composer in Philadelphia, Zach Wright, and he did a lot of that slide guitar. He bought a vintage slide guitar, and there's some pedal steel on it. It's just, it evokes really the feeling of the West and the opportunity that can be there, but also the confronting the reality of like sometimes these opportunities that we think we have are just actual, but they're a bust.
Yeah. But there's still hope at the end of this.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's Brendan's sensibilities as a filmmaker and mine as well. You know, you have to pepper in hope and optimism in the face of this sort of like bleak,
Yeah.
totally impossible life that these people live, you know.
Yeah. The doctor who has the needle exchange. I mean, there's so many positive people that are incredible that they're giving and volunteering their time for, a problem that it doesn't seem like, the government might be taking care of, and that people are doing it on their own. Well, it
Yeah.
was inspiring.
I mean, I think the thing that I took away from the film that Brendan did such an amazing job of creating is that, like, even in the face of this systemic failure of our government, there are still amazing people that are going to emerge and fix those problems themselves just out of the kindness of their heart, because that's the only way to get there. Dr. Lasher is a volunteer. All of his other associates are all volunteers. And, Richard created a nonprofit just to serve the kids, just like him, from his own background. So yeah, that was just a really inspiring piece of the film that I really love.
Yeah, a lot of that, I think, I'm thinking about it just now, but I mean, within this context of what you're bringing up, I think my sense and my kind of intuition of wanting to highlight that in terms of the nonprofits and Dr. Lasher and Richard with Live Again Fresno and just the volunteer work is I was a Peace Corps volunteer for several years in West Africa before, so I got back in 2012. So shortly thereafter started this. And I think, through that experience, we all know charities, nonprofit, well-intentioned, they can fall flat on their face and kind of not have the efficacy that one would hope for necessarily. But I think that type of work, volunteer work, that, Dr. Lasher, he's been doing this for over 2 decades now. And Richard starting this right around the time I started this film. I think there's a line Dr. Lasher says at some point, I don't even remember if it made it in the cut, but it's, we're here trying to fill in the gaps on the front lines to do what we can, but systemically, these are much bigger issues. So I think at that type of work at its best, it's something that can be a model as an example to hopefully scale up to a bigger degree. I mean, obviously this is, these motel rows, I'm sure many people who, have seen this, there's the Florida Project in Florida. These places are ubiquitous. They're a common feature in most major cities around the United States. So it's a huge issue. It's not just Fresno, and it's something heretofore that hasn't, system-wide been addressed within our society. But I found a lot of inspiration in just kind of highlighting the Dr. Lashers and, the Richard Burrells and the work that they do, without being too preachy about it, as maybe just kind of, a quick look at a glance of something that could be scaled up to a greater degree potentially, to address, these issues that are pretty common throughout the US.
I would say you succeeded in that. It didn't feel, like it was just opening up a window to another thing that was happening within the community, where you felt, that there was some support, yet, maybe not all that was necessary, especially when they're putting into apartments and then, getting out of them and having to go back into the motels because of all that. I mean, it's so it's a very complex journey that these people are going on and that people do go on. So I really appreciate this film so much. And is there anything that I haven't really touched on that you'd like to say about the film, or how'd I do? No.
No, these questions were great. I'm trying to think. I mean, I think we touched on most of it. I mean, yeah, I mean, my main hope, like I said, is another factoid that's thrown out there is, Fresno, it's a city of about 500,000 people. So it's, considered a large US city. And, you have about 25%, 1 in 4 addicted to methamphetamine within that population. And, another same number below the poverty line. So I look using this as sort of, a specific look at a lived experience, but also, um, I think it's important to create that empathy and human connection of this experience that I think most, my hope is that most people that see this film, they'll think of that motel row on whatever street downtown or just outside of town, that's, I mean, more localized to them. And I just have some reflection of, how do we address this thing? It's very complicated. I mean, there's all kinds of issues involved, from mental health and housing affordability and just, I mean, income inequality, and trying to move beyond these news statistics that just seem so kind of overwhelming and complex and also impersonal, where I think people just kind of glaze over, and it's, it's like a throw your hands up in the air. And just to see that through one person, hopefully to make it a little more specific, I guess, and, a little more just more personable and more relatable. As something that it's easy to place blame and judgment on, people who go through these experiences. But my hope is that this will kind of be an antidote to counteract that a little bit, for a general audience.
Well, I'm really excited for everybody to see it, and online and in person. So thank you so much for your time, both of you. And it was great. Appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Gigi.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you so much.